Welcome to the first episode of First Light, a science fiction short story compilation written by Scott McGowan. This episode is a proof of concept and is not intended for broadcast. Please do not distribute this episode without express permission. Thank you, and enjoy the show. The Last Samurai, Chapter 1, Puzzles and Tea. Dawn did not believe in ghosts. To present this as a possibility would be a misuse of the word believe. She did not have the capability for belief beyond what she could determine as factual. And yet, the murmuring she had been hearing around the guild of a vengeful spirit attacking and killing teams of hunters on mission was disturbing to her. She gathered that the deaths were happening in and around an unmanned weather station in the tropical zone, and that they happened indiscriminately in daylight hours. The spirit would apparently disrupt communications with the guild somehow before killing its victims, whose bodies would be dismembered in most cases, beheaded in all. Missions in the area were being turned down by all but the least superstitious of hunters, and the station was at risk of being abandoned, its scientific potential lost due to a lack of upkeep and maintenance. Nobody wanted to die for a room full of computers in spite of its actual value to the colony. This was a most unusual puzzle. Clearly something, or more likely someone, was down there, was killing people. And yet scans of the area revealed no signs of life, no nearby settlements, no traces of the assailant. While she did not think their assertions were correct, Dawn could understand why people were calling it a ghost. It did intrigue her, but she was more interested in discovering how someone could avoid being seen by colony scanners and disrupt guild communications so easily. There was a clear gap in the information, and she wanted to fill it. She had her pick of missions. The board was rife with them, from area surveys to supply deliveries to small maintenance jobs, and she decided to perform a few experiments. First, she would take on a low-paying job like clearing some overgrowth. It was one that didn't require special clearance or rank. It carried with it a weather warning due to the tropical climate, letting hunters know that there was a risk of heavy rain and wind and that things could change at any moment, but no others. It was a job that they expected just about anyone could do. And they were probably correct. After taking the teleporter down to the surface and setting foot on the ground just outside the station, she got to work cutting away some of the creeping vines on the building exterior with her saber, the plants easily giving way under the heat of the hard light blade. Even working at a deliberately slow pace and taking extra time to prune some of the more hardy plants down to the roots, the job took her about an hour and a half, and she saw no one else while she worked. This confirmed for her that whatever the spirit was, it wasn't always present at the station, or at least not for the time she had been working. So she stayed on the surface a bit longer, walking around the building and peeking through the windows as the front door was locked and she did not have access. Inside, she could see large racks of equipment humming away, an array of blinking lights of indeterminate purpose. On the roof of the building was a large communications array, and every once in a while, she could perceive an electromagnetic signal pulse outwards from it. It was strong enough that she could feel the data in the pulse, decrypting and interpreting it as it passed through her and outwards towards the colony. It was, unsurprisingly, an update on the current temperature, wind conditions, and humidity. They happened infrequently and randomly enough that it was clear to her they were in response to a manual query, though she hadn't noticed any coming down from the colony itself. The sun was beginning to set, and she had still seen no sign of the ghost, and all of her limbs were still attached, so she requested extraction and collected her measly, but appropriate, she thought, reward for a job done. She used most of the ore to purchase a can of fortified tea from the vendor outside the guild. As she stood there, drinking the entire thing in one steady, unbroken motion, she took note, not for the first time, of the 2-inch square sticker on the bottom right of the machine's display. It was red block letters on a black background, and simply said, "Simon says, recycle your cans." She had been tracking the progress of this sticker for 3 weeks, noticing it after a trip to an offshore drilling rig in which her team was caught in a bad storm, and most of her energy had depleted by the time they were extracted. She remembered manually setting most of her systems into standby or low power mode, and she was desperate for a recharge. The can of tea she got from this vendor felt like having a weight lifted off her, and when she was getting a second one, she saw the sticker and thought it odd. She still found it odd now, but even more so as it had yet to be removed. She reasoned, perhaps, that High Command wasn't terribly upset at the message. If anything, they might encourage more of this kind of vandalism if it demanded good behavior. She placed the now empty can back in the vendor's open slot, and it was quickly taken back inside the machine to be cleaned and reused. She often felt like she wanted to take the front panel off of one of these machines just to see what was going on inside, to confirm her suspicions on how it worked. She thought she had a good idea, but was fuzzy on the details. She wanted to remedy that, but doing so in this moment would surely bring unwanted attention to her, so she decided to wait for another opportunity. On the train back to her condo, her pod alerted her to an incoming message. She interfaced with it internally and read the message in a fraction of a second. It was from Ruben, asking if she was on her way back. In a similar amount of time, she had already queued a response.
Yes, I stopped at the drink vendor outside the guild and was looking at a sticker.
Then she waited for Ruben's message back. She knew that he took much longer to write than she did, but she had the benefit of a direct neural link with her pod, while he had to tap on his with his fingers. Already a huge disadvantage, but he also needed time to think about what to say. After just under a minute, his next message came through. "What'd you get?" Her reply was instant.
Fortified tea.
Gross. It was a little ritual for them. He had tried the tea once and found it revolting, but couldn't explain to her why he thought that. She didn't find anything to be wrong with it. It was calorically dense, good for recharging her systems, and while she couldn't taste or smell it, she could feel the texture of it as it made its way through her intake systems, the slight carbonation providing what Ruben told her was a tingling sensation. It was novel, not like the plainness of most beverages, and so she was interested in it. Upon realizing he would be unable to accurately describe his qualitative distaste for it, Ruben had settled for just calling it gross. Ever since, if he ever saw her with a canned drink, he'd ask what it was, and if she said it was fortified tea, he'd say, gross. It was the simplest interaction the two of them ever had. The input and output would always be the same. She liked that. It occurred to her, thinking about it, that she liked it. She wondered why there was a distinction to that specific interaction, but she didn't question the validity of the statement. She did, in fact, like it. She tried to think of some other things she liked. Tea? She drank it all the time, but she wasn't sure about that one. She got tangible benefits from it, energy, unique sensations, and something in common with the humans around her who would also drink things on occasion. It would make sense to like something that gave her a reliably positive outcome. But she tested out the phrase, "I like fortified tea" in her head and found that it didn't register as truthful. She worked backwards from the tea through all the things she had interacted with in her day to make a note of anything that made sense. Out of everything she tried, there were only 2 that she knew to be factual. She liked when Ruben called her tea gross, and she liked the train. She didn't know why either of those were true, but it would be interesting to find out. At that point, though, the train had pulled up at her station, and so she put that puzzle in a little box somewhere inside her mind to look at later. Ruben was going to want to chat when she got home, and she needed to prepare herself. Chapter 2. Rest and Reason. Dawn did not need to sleep, at least not in the same way that Ruben did. She'd noticed early on that he needed at least 7.5 hours of sleep in order to operate at full capacity, and even then he would often augment his wakefulness with a cup of coffee, sometimes 2. She knew that this was a habitual action based on a chemical dependency on certain compounds in the drink, and that he would often consume it even if he didn't necessarily need to. She was able to find an analog to the first part, associating it with her own recently developed habit of drinking fortified tea after a hunt, but the second part she always found irrational. Inquiring about this behavior led to a long conversation between the two of them, breaking down Ruben's decision-making and how it was driven not by direct efficiency or hard logic, but by a collection of seemingly disconnected conditions and thought processes. At one point, the conversation came to an end when Ruben said, quote, "I don't know, I just like it." His tone had taken on an air of frustration, and it was something that Dawn would turn over in her head every once in a while when she didn't have more pressing things to devote her time to. She did, however, take some time during Ruben's sleep schedule to perform some more resource-intensive maintenance tasks. By putting her movement, speech synthesis, and high-level thought processes into standby, she was able to maximize efficiency for these tasks by devoting a higher percentage of her energy towards them. She kept her sight online out of concern of being attacked while immobile. It was a holdover from when she didn't have a bed like this to rest in, when errors in her processing would pile up and cause her to operate in inefficient or erratic ways. This routine, now that she had optimized and performed it with regularity, only took her 3 hours, but she would often stay immobile for however long it took for Ruben to wake up, as she didn't want to prematurely wake him. She knew that any interruption to his sleep could lead to errors in his processing. She found it interesting that in many ways he functioned the same way that she did. But she realized that her thinking was reversed. In actuality, she functioned like humans did, even on a microprocessing level, because she was created by them. One time she tried to think about what she would be like if another species had created her, but it quickly led to a circular logic tree. So she compiled her thoughts on that idea, marked it with a warning to not open the process back up, and tucked it away somewhere that she kept similar, untenable files. Even though she was able to charge her energy while resting like this and didn't need to worry about conservation, she had, as of late, taken to keeping most of the idling systems in standby. There wasn't much of anything to do while Ruben slept, so unless she had a high-priority task she needed to process, she was often lying completely motionless. Tonight was not an idle night. As soon as the artificial light generator in the room dimmed to a pale silver, simulating the moonlight of old Earth, she estimated how long her maintenance tasks would take to run, postponing them when she determined it would be the full 3 hours. She put all systems other than high-level thought and sight into standby, and started replaying the events of the day, from the moment she materialized onto the surface to the moment she left. She went over the way the vines crept on the exterior walls of the station as though they were trying to reach something that lay inside. She brought up a log file she made of the data being sent out by the communications array and scanned it for irregularities. She analyzed an audio recording she had made during the excursion for any signs of unnatural sound like movement, footsteps, speech. Her first pass found nothing. Her second pass was the same. She went through it 15 more times, randomizing the order of the data with each pass to eliminate coincidences. After 4 hours of high-intensity examination, she determined with 96% certainty that there was nothing unusual about the data she collected. That last 4% was the communications array. She had detected the outgoing data, it was nearly impossible not to, it being a high-energy signal, but had not detected any coming in. This suggested to her that there was a possibility the input signal was too weak for her systems to pick up. But she weighed that against data she collected about the colony transmitters and concluded that it was unlikely the signal would deteriorate to that level over that distance. This meant that the query had to have come from somewhere other than the colony. Perhaps, she reasoned, there was a hardwired connection to the station from another base on the surface, and the pings were coming from there. That seemed, to her, to be unusual and inefficient. There was a clear gap in the information, and she didn't want to leave it empty, but she was running out of time to perform her maintenance tasks and wanted to be at full operating capacity for her next experiment. As she queued up the tasks and put high-level thought into standby, it occurred to her that she was becoming hyper-focused on this puzzle. She made a quick note to herself, referencing something Victoria had once said. Don't get so caught up in one thing that you stop paying attention. In that context, it had been about lining up a long-range rifle shot and how it could open you up to an attack from behind. Dawn wanted to avoid that possibility. She entered maintenance mode, sight processes still active, and went to sleep. Chapter 3. Unexpected Errors. This time, Dawn knew that she needed to get into the station, so she checked the guild board for missions requiring higher clearance. Colony hardware, even the less substantial kind, was not allowed to be operated on or even accessed by anyone who hadn't undergone extensive background checks, psychological profiling, routine health scans, and a recent log of successful guild missions. The risk of tampering or misuse carried with it a heavy potential cost. Being an android allowed Dawn to pass her evaluations quickly. As far as those examining her knew, she had no capability nor reason to purposefully sabotage functioning equipment, and her overall health was spectacular. She found and applied for one of the listings, a request to manually reseat a handful of data cables, and waited for approval from High Command. As she waited, she noticed the number of posts for the station had decreased by 2, indicating that in addition to her excursion yesterday, someone else had accepted one. She reasoned that not many people would have accepted a night mission for that spot, what with it being low-priority infrastructure, and expected that someone would then likely be there already when she arrived, as she came down to the guild when morning was breaking in the station's time zone. Approval came fast. Dawn was whitelisted for most clearance levels, and a one-time access pass was downloaded onto her pod by the guild receptionist. The woman behind the counter flashed her a smile that utilized none of the muscles above her cheeks, and with practiced excitement told Dawn to "Have a great hunt." Dawn responded with,
"You too."
It was something Ruben said once in response to one of these clerks, and when he did, Victoria smiled. A genuine smile, rare coming from her. So Dawn said it every time. Nobody ever questioned it. She teleported to the surface and immediately began scanning the area for anything different to her visit yesterday. The sun, just peeking over the horizon, cast a golden glow on the bright white exterior walls of the weather station, the light catching on the reflective antennas on the communications array and overloading some areas of her vision with blinding white light. She moved a hand up to cover her eyes, resetting the light sensors within, and only then did she notice that the door to the station was wide open. The guild had not sent her a life sign scan warning, so whoever was here would be in the log files. She did not prepare for a dangerous encounter. Walking up to the open door, she instead prepared herself for polite conversation, rerouting a percentage of processing power away from combat and into the far more complex modules devoted to language. Talking to people she knew was challenging enough. A new person was a feat, and she was alone, without another human to rely on to carry that weight. Her concerns about conversation were allayed the second she entered the building and saw the blood. Every part of her redirected back to combat. She interfaced with her pod in a fraction of a second to recall a saber from her weapons cache, grabbing the hilt even before it was fully materialized and reversing blade drawn out the door so as to not have her back exposed to whatever was in there. She waited. 5 seconds. Long enough for an attacker to have noticed her and make a move. And when she heard no sound other than the dull hum of the racks of equipment, she methodically stepped through the door again, her weapon casting a bright blue glow as it burned with high-intensity photons. To her left was a dead end, an L-shaped arrangement of neatly cabled networking gear of some make opposite the western front window. In front of her, a wall bearing a large colony sigil and no other decoration. To her right, a trail of blood, leading through a door threshold and around a corner. Operating under the assumption that an assailant was not currently present, she quickly composed a Mayday message to the guild, providing details about what she was witnessing. Turning the corner caused her text processing to falter as she struggled to reckon with what she was seeing. The trail led to a pool of blood about 4 feet in diameter in the middle of a hallway lined with more racks of something, not high priority. In the blood lay she wasn't sure. A body? It did not have the correct number of limbs to be a human. She counted again to make sure, then realized that it made more sense if some limbs had been removed. This confirmed it was humanoid, but again, a stumbling block. It lacked a head. Then she found that, too, a few meters away. Rewriting her message to indicate her certainty that it was a human body and human blood, she sent it, requesting immediate backup and recommending they perform a manual life sign scan for a 10-kilometer radius around the station. Her temperature sensors indicated that the blood on the floor was still warm, and whatever was here couldn't have gone far in that amount of time. This kind of brutality required precise cuts. The claws and teeth of most animals would have left coarse, mangled remains. It could be the work of a Nothraksha, but they would have gone for the guts first. That would be a puzzle for later. She scanned her facial recognition database to see if she knew the unfortunate soul that lay before her. There was a face, but no name. He was young, a novice hunter. She had seen him around the guild before. He did not associate with many groups of people and was often alone. He may not have heard the rumors of the Vengeful Spirit. His armor was custom and free from scratches or UV damage, likely brand new. This was not the kind of hunter, she thought, that would be approved for clearance to be in this building. He should not have been here. A guild response came back. They were sending a team, but it would be a few minutes. The message was flagged by high command, who informed the guild they would be sending a guard representative. Dawn knew what this meant. They were anticipating a high-level threat. She needed to be fully alert, increasing her energy usage to give more power to her perception systems. The guild also informed her that life sign scans picked up no anomalous signals. With the hunter before her dead, she was the only living thing in that building. None of this made any sense. The gap in information was now a chasm, and now another person was dead. And if she didn't solve this puzzle, it wouldn't be the last. She did not like this. Chapter 4. Rumours and Vandals. Word had spread fast about Dawn's recent excursion. The murmurs of a vengeful spirit haunting the weather station now held with them the weight of truth. For she had seen its violence with her own eyes, recorded it, reported it, was subject to an investigation regarding it. She had given the guard everything she had, compiling it into one comprehensive file transferred from her pod to the main investigators. She was new, or at least someone Dawn had not met before, and introduced herself as Michaela Weld. Dawn found her easy to talk to. All of her questions were direct requests for information rather than speculation, and she seemed to greatly appreciate Dawn's candor and cooperation. However, she would not provide Dawn with any information outside of what they were discussing, even after several probing inquiries. She knew why, of course. The guard wanted to keep things under control. The guild wanted to keep taking contracts. Panic among the hunters could lead to a severe labor shortage, and High Command had their hands full with work that needed to be done. So there could be no speculation, no rumors, no accusations. It needed to be buried, for now. In spite of this, speculation, rumors, and accusations became a daily occurrence in and around the guild. Nothing with enough legs to start running wild, but Dawn was noticing more and more conversations that pertained to the situation. Not everyone agreed on the villain of the story. Some said it was a mantis-like creature that would burrow underground and wait for prey to come near, then attack with its scythe-like arms and drink the blood of its victims for nourishment. Others said it was a high-ranking official abusing classified clearance levels to obscure their movements and enact their psychotic fantasies. There were a few who did actually believe it to be a ghost. As far as Dawn was concerned, there was no evidence that it was the first two, but the lack of evidence to refute the third troubled her. She had not told Ruben about what she had found, only that her contract was interrupted by a sudden appearance of a guard investigation. That kind of thing happened often enough that he did not pry, to Dawn's relief. She was not sure she was capable of lying. She hadn't tried and didn't see a valid reason to do so, but she knew very well how to omit information. She did it constantly, her mind processing thousands of parallel data streams just to properly respond to, "How was your day?" If she included all the information she had that was pertinent to that question, she would be stuck there for an hour. That had happened once. 2 weeks passed. Dawn kept a close eye on the guild board as she worked on other contracts. The weather station was not a hot spot. A request would come in, sit on the board for a few hours, then disappear. It was longer than the average posting would last on there, with most being accepted within 30 minutes. This was a point of pride for the guild. With so many hunters in their employ, they could almost guarantee a job would be accepted by someone, and fast. It was the jobs that were highly classified, highly dangerous, or highly tedious that would linger. The longest she had ever seen one last was 4 days. It was an escort request for a retiring high command member who wanted to sit on the beach and watch a sunset as a birthday present. The beach in question was known to be home to a species of aggressive flying arthropods with a paralytic sting. It was a perfect trifecta. The hunter would need high-level clearance, it carried a high risk of injury or death, and it was nauseatingly boring. Dawn almost took the job herself, just to clear it from the board. It was clear to her that all the talk surrounding the station was affecting response rates. There had been no other incidents since hers, and regular maintenance was being done, albeit at a slower pace, so she considered the possibility that the killings had stopped. While this would be a favorable outcome, it left her knowing nothing more than what she had discovered. It left the puzzle unsolved. She returned from a short land assessment job, a few ore lighter, and 1 can of fortified tea heavier. Dawn once again examined the condition of the sticker left on the vendor. "Simon says recycle your cans" was as bold and confrontational as ever, with only the mark of a few attempted pickings at the corners.
That's one strong sticker,
she thought, and it became all the more perplexing. It was vandalism, but well-manufactured vandalism, and its messaging was in line with the behavior High Command desired. She turned away from the vendor screen and looked around. There were at least 6 security cameras visible. Guild property was constantly under high surveillance. Too many people with high-powered weapons were coming in and out to risk leaving things up to simple sense. It occurred to her that the challenge of applying this sticker in itself was the act of rebellion. A way of saying, I can break the rules and get away with it no matter how hard you try to catch me. Whoever put this sticker here must have had a method to avoid being caught on camera, or maybe they could have access to the logs and... Her processor surged with activity. The fortified tea burned off in the reactor that churned in her abdomen, subsystems built on subsystems extracting every millijoule of caloric energy to fuel the rush in her circuitry. The pale white light of her eyes brightened as electrical signals convened behind them, a symphony of microswitches running code too complex to grasp, all to examine and re-examine and recontextualize a mountain of data in a fraction of a second. To her surprise, her speech synthesis module fired off without her input, causing 2 words to escape her lips.
The logs.
She had an idea. Chapter 5. The Vengeful Spirit. Several factors had come into perfect alignment for her next move. 1. Another data cable had come loose. There were typically redundancies in place to deal with this possibility, but the science division's focus had been on quick deployment and scaling operations, and often only a single redundant system was deemed to be enough for lower priority installations like the weather station. This meant that, in the worst case scenario, the redundant system could experience an error, another loose cable, and the entire station would go offline, losing potentially crucial meteorological information that could be used in future terraforming. And so, one loose cable meant a contract needed to be posted on the guild board. Unfortunately, the error had been detected during Dawn's maintenance cycle, and so she might have missed the posting had it not been for the second factor: the storm. The job posting carried a severe weather warning. A low-pressure area had been detected near the station a few days prior, and all systems indicated at the time of posting that its formation was now centered less than a kilometer away. Manual querying by the guild reported near-surface wind speeds of 83 kilometers per hour, with an accompanying 26 millimeters of rain forecast in the next hour. The station itself was constructed to withstand such forces, thankfully, and there was little risk of damage from tree fall due to its positioning, but such erratic weather was unattractive to hunters looking for easy work. This, combined with the station's already low reputation due to the rumors, led to the job remaining unassigned until Dawn checked the board from her pod after the conclusion of her maintenance. She had been waiting for her next opportunity for 3 days now, and when she received her clearance for the mission and it was put on hold in her name, she was practically vibrating with anticipation. Ruben noticed this as he poured himself his first cup of coffee that morning, jokingly stating that he didn't need to offer her any. If this was what caffeine did to him, she considered, then suddenly she understood the reasoning behind it. While her energy levels were the same as they always were, she noticed that her systems were operating at a slightly overclocked rate. Not enough to cause a noticeable drop in efficiency, but enough that she felt different, more alert, as though her limbs weighed less. She described this to him and he smiled at her. "You're excited."
I am excited.
She repeated internally. It registered as truth. How could she not be? In 30 minutes, she would be on the surface again, and she believed she had all the information she needed to reach a conclusion. A few hours, some diagnostic testing to confirm her suspicions, and the problem would be solved. She was 98% certain that this would be her final experiment. She ran over the remaining 2% while on the train. She boarded at the station a few minutes' walk from Ruben's quarters in the Central Colony District, and it was a 24-minute ride directly to the guild at the bow of the ship. The frictionless ride made the train car a near-dead silent space in the absence of riders, and Dawn purposely chose the emptiest car when she rode alone so that she could process her thoughts more efficiently. There was still a possibility that she was wrong. She knew that. She brought up the internal note she had made weeks ago. Don't get so caught up in one thing that you stop paying attention. She had the shot lined up just as Victoria did, and she was sure that if she pulled the trigger, she would hit. But there was a chance that she was missing something. She tried to think of some factors she may be ignoring, but could not come up with any. Meaning that if something was going to prove her wrong, it would have to be something she was unaware of. This unsettled her, the idea that she might not be aware of something. It was a concept she saw in others when they made avoidable mistakes, a missed shot, a poorly calculated deployment like the offshore rig. But she mainly saw it in herself in social interactions, like if she made a poorly worded remark. It had yet to manifest as actual danger. She considered sending a message to Ruben to tell him about her plan, to ask him to keep tabs on her, but realized that would cause him to worry, and so decided against it. She did not want to be a source of negativity for him. On her way into the guild's front desk area, she took a passing glance at the vendor outside. Simon Says Recycle Your Cans was still there, as unmolested as it had been the last time she saw it. All this surveillance, she mused, and nobody seemed to care about it. She walked into the guild proper, scanned her pod for the desk clerk, and heard the telltale whooshing sound of the teleporter activating on the other side of the room, behind a large door guarded by 2 armed guard personnel. The woman behind the desk smiled, a genuine smile, and her voice bristled with enthusiasm as she exclaimed, "Have a great hunt." She must be new.
You too,
Dawn replied, and stepped through the door onto the teleportation platform. The sterile, new steel walls and manufactured air around her blipped instantaneously out of existence, replaced with a frigid, buffeting torrent of wind and rain that clipped her audio transistors. She turned down the gain to an acceptable level and got her bearings. The station still stood, despite the relentless assault of nature, and the dim glow of status lights gave it an ethereal aura in the midst of the surrounding darkness. There were no exterior lights, and the clouds were dense enough to block out most sunlight, so Dawn had to increase the sensitivity of her photoreceptors in order to find the door. It opened upon her coming within a few feet of it, sliding sideways into the wall to reveal the colony sigil and a synthesized double beep denoting permission to enter. She hesitated, struggling against the darkness to check for anything out of the ordinary that might be waiting inside. When she was confident that all was as it should be, she stepped through the door, and it gently slid closed behind her, bringing the cacophony of noise outside to a low rumble. She checked the mission logs. The offending cable was on Rack 52, Unit C. She started on the left side of the building, glancing at the walls of equipment for any indicators, and found hand-carved symbols in the new steel rack supports, some hastily scratched out and rewritten, running from 1 to 32 horizontally and varying letters vertically. Some of the equipment in question took up more vertical space, and so there were racks that ran A to F, A to T, A to AD, and all manner of variations thereof, but she did not see Rack 32. This meant, unfortunately, that she would have to search the other room, the one where she found the body. Something about that idea caused her to reroute some energy into her combat cores, and she interfaced with her pod to load a saber from her weapon cache, its dim blue light appearing almost blinding to her in contrast to everything else. She adjusted her vision to compensate, and the room grew eerily dark, so she searched for a light switch and found none. Clearly, the purpose of this station was not to house researchers. Besides the constantly flickering status lights on the walls, there were no creature comforts to speak of. She used her saber as a kind of torch to light her way past the front door and around the right-hand corner, stepping through the threshold into the next room. She almost expected to find the body there, on the floor, as though it were a decorative centerpiece, but blissfully, it was empty. All she needed to do was find the cable. Thanks to the primitive numbering system on the racks, she easily located the 4-pin socket in question, the optical cable dangling uselessly a few centimeters nearby. She did not plug it back in. She had work to do first. With a quick reprioritization of processing threads, she brought her vision and hearing down to near zero levels and focused instead on electrical pulses. There were millions of them, occurring thousands of times every second, and she whirred audibly as she began to examine each individual signal. She filtered out the ones she could identify as locally bound packets, as she wasn't interested in what the equipment was passing between itself. She needed inbound and outbound information. Referencing the log file she made of the data she had inadvertently gathered the last time the communications array fired pulses, she was able to further discern what was being processed to be sent to the colony and removed that from her scope as well. This left her with less than 2% of all information that was being handled by the station, and after comparing streams to eliminate redundant data, she found what she was looking for: control messages. It was encrypted data, as she expected, so she isolated a few samples of what she suspected to be null segments through verification against the colony code she had access to. No matches. Then she tried the handful of guard codes she had reverse engineered from communications she had had with them. No matches. She had one high command access code. One that M had hidden deep in a root file and told her only to use when absolutely necessary. She had obeyed him until now, and made a note to apologize to him in person the next time she saw him, as she circumvented the labyrinthian file system to access the code. The code was Simon Says. It was a match. The data stream opened up to her.
220 smtp1.sciences.colony smtp. Nice to see you. HELL pioneer.control. 250 smtp1.sciences.colony. CC from central at pioneer.control. 250 OK. RCPT2. Station 33 at sciences.colony. 250 OK. Stand by. 250 stand by. Sequence end. 221 goodbye.
The message came through every 10 seconds without changing. Dawn set a dedicated process to monitor it for anomalies while she searched her database for any logs containing sciences.colony and pioneer.control. The first turned up many results. It seemed to be the internal reference address for most Sciences equipment. This was clearly Station 33, which she verified by tuning back into a few outgoing data streams. What she found no mention of was pioneer.control. It did not appear to have any relation to colony infrastructure. This raised several possibilities. The first being that it was simply older technology that had been phased out. Siren Base had only been fully constructed 10 years ago. There wasn't much chance that High Command would deprecate such crucial systems when expansion was still underway. The second was that it was a middleman attack, adopting a seemingly innocuous address name to bypass security measures, but the messages were coming through too often. Someone would have noticed by now, surely, and Dawn couldn't think of much of a point to hacking a weather station. The third possibility was that it was a private address, one not listed in colony documentation, which meant that it was highly classified. As she made note of the address, time-stamped for future reference, her monitoring process tripped. In a millisecond, she switched focus to see what had changed.
Go.
Something in the air shifted almost imperceptibly. The machinery whirred a fraction of a percent louder as Dawn traced the process making its way from the data intake through the racks, cloned for redundancy and then cloned again for verification, received and cleared by frequency match modulation chipsets that generated encryption codes to send to data aggregators, to send through sorting algorithms, to send through compression algorithms, to send through... She followed it all the way through, out of the main room and into the first on the left, racks 1 to 32A to AD, and everything in between through a single optical cable, no redundancy, funny enough, to the communications array, roof through to the antenna, through to... The data signal, amplified by the antenna and further amplified by Dawn's recalibration, was too much for her to bear. It overpowered all of her internal processing, leaving her only with the bare minimum required for her to stand up and fruitlessly cover her audio sensors in an attempt to stop the stream. It didn't matter. The data was all around her, consuming her focus. It stopped a few milliseconds later, and she attempted to regain herself. It happened again. And then again. She fell to her knees, her circuits overloading with data. Nearly all of her processing power was now dedicated to handling the signal, her entire being devoted to the ambient temperature, the torrential rain, the howling of the wind outside that she could not hear but could visualize from the data, pounding against her insides repetitively, unceasingly, removing any semblance of thought from her. She could not help but become an extension of it, a resonator for it, her eyes flickering rapidly in a binary sequence mirroring that being fired off to the colony. Her memory was filling with the data faster than she could purge it, and the minute amount of power she could muster against it was starting to lose control. In a moment of sheer desperation, she queued up emergency code 00 to fire a hardwired override switch somewhere in the depths of herself, and a loud crack came out of her as she physically ejected the systems responsible for high-level processing. The modules shot like rockets from their slots and ricocheted off the inside of her abdomen, and her arms almost instinctively wrapped around herself to keep them from escaping. She could replace them later, but for now, the data stream disappeared. Her vision returned, though her hearing did not, fully. She had left the gain low and was now unable to readjust the sensitivity, and she resisted the programmed urge to vomit, which was part of the emergency protocol. She took inventory of herself at 1/10 of the speed she normally could, and concluded that no major damage had occurred, and began to rise to her feet again. It was close enough that, even with her diminished senses, she heard the sound before she registered an impact on her left shoulder. She turned to look and saw nothing. Then she felt it again on her right. Then on the left side of her neck, just below where her jugular would be had she been a human. Whatever it was, her new steel exterior did not give way to it, only leaving a small mark on her neck. She could hear a murmuring from behind her. At the current gain level on her audio sensors, she reckoned it was really more like a shout. She rose to her feet and turned to face what waited for her. Standing there was a man, slightly taller than her, long but well-kempt gray facial hair and a topknot, dressed in a long flowing garment that she identified as an expensive Nova textile robe. He held in both hands a long hard light saber, but the photons did not glow. Rather, they reflected the light around them like a polished mirror. She reasoned then that it was not photons at all, but metal. It was a sword, a real, physical blade like one she knew of from historical documents. She had never seen one before, and she found some delight in looking at it, even in this moment, watching the light from her own blade interact with its surface, scattering it outwards and highlighting the man's grim, terrified expression. His lips moved, and though she could not hear him, she understood what he was saying. "What are you?" he shouted. His arms were trembling. Dawn could not process a response. That module was floating aimlessly inside her. Instead, she raised her saber and pointed it towards him. Power diverted to her combat subsystems. She was perfectly optimized either to run or to fight, and she was not about to run. The man screamed and dropped his weapon. Hurriedly, he brought his left forearm up to his face, struggling to read the display on his pod in the darkness. A civilian, Dawn thought. Their pods weren't backlit. They didn't have to be. She lowered her weapon, quickly stepped to him without making a single noise, and before he noticed that she had approached him, she was right in front of him. She grasped his pod with her open hand and crushed it in a single motion. He screamed again. She must have used too much force because his entire hand went limp. She released him and he scrambled to the floor, diving between her legs. Her eyes followed him curiously. She recognized she was no longer in any danger, and she watched, emotionless, as he picked his sword up off the ground and plunged it straight through his own stomach. Her audio receptors dropped below baseline, peaking back into audible levels only when the man's involuntary gurgling became louder than the hum of the data arrays. She followed his eyes as they first looked downward at the sword, as if he were surprised, then up to meet hers, then rolled fully upwards until only the whites were visible. Gravity took his head first, and soon his body followed, muscular contractions coiling him into a heap of flesh and cloth and blood. In the cold blue light of that room, ambient temperature 9 degrees Celsius, wind speed 84 kilometers per hour, humidity 89%, and all those other things she would likewise never forget about that day. Dawn watched the man's breathing falter as he coughed up blood, his wound oozing through his beautifully crafted robes. And she stood motionless as the last few invisible strands of carbon and oxygen left his lungs, becoming another body on the floor of Station 33. The only spirit in this place was the one that had just left him, and she was left alone there with so many more questions she could not answer. Chapter 6. Recall. The guard was not happy with her. She didn't need to be a human to recognize that. They kept her in the pristine white room for several hours now, and despite her best efforts to answer their questions, she had not been allowed to leave. She was not, however, terribly bothered by it. She spent some of the time she had been left alone carefully opening her abdominal cavity, a delicate process but one she had done many times, to locate the ejected modules and slot them back into place. As her higher processing cores whirred back to life, she felt her internal voice return to her, and she was relieved to once again operate at full capacity. There was also an unused electrical outlet on the wall close to her chair that she was able to discreetly run a lead wire to and siphon some power from, allowing her to relax some of the more intensive of her energy generation processes. From her perspective, as long as she was able to use the power from the wall, she could wait as long as she needed to. And Michaela Weld made that fact known very loudly as she stormed into the room, berating the men who had wasted their time trying to tire out the poor girl. She slammed the door in frustration and sat, flustered, in a chair opposite Dawn. She took a moment to fix her spectacles before apologizing for the delays. Dawn reassured her that it was not an issue, and that she appreciated the time she was allotted to manually reseat her higher processing modules. Michaela found this amusing. "So we can have a conversation then?" Dawn nodded affirmatively. "Good. I just have a few things I need to go over before we can close this up." She raised her pod. It projected a holographic notepad with a keyboard that she typed on with her opposite hand. They went through the timeline again. Dawn made sure to answer the questions in agonizing detail. She apologized for not providing video evidence. It would have relied on one of the cores she had ejected. "And you don't remember how the man got into the building?" Dawn paused to recheck her memory for the third time.
I have no recollection of it. I believe that his entry occurred while I was dealing with a telemetry overload.
Weld leaned forward in her chair. "Do you think that was his intent?"
I think that he was fortunate I was susceptible to it. But I believe that the sudden spike in queries to the station was not from me. Rather, it may have been intended to act as a cover for teleportation. If the radio signal was powerful and frequent enough, it could mask the area from the Guild scanners and prevent them from seeing any new life signs.
Her interrogator started typing again, then swiped a few times on the holographic screen to bring up some related reports. "Yes, our investigation team came to that same conclusion." She then went on to explain to Dawn that this matter had been under investigation since the first hunter had been killed at the station, and that the guard had narrowed it down to 2 major suspects, both of which were known to them as high risk with previous criminal activity. The man in question was a wealthy colony citizen, the son of old Earth nobility, highly active in conspiracist groups and on a watch list. He did not have teleporter access, meaning his appearance, surface side, had to have been from a private port. He had killed 5 people in just a few months. The most recent victim, the novice hunter, had forged clearance in order to access the station, and the guard believed he was attempting to find an acquaintance who had gone missing. Victim 2. The others were just contractors, with no connection between them other than the Guild. They were not certain about the killer's motives or how he was able to use the station to cover his tracks, and Dawn was not about to speculate. She was comfortable letting the guard do their job in that regard, and due to the classified nature of the transmission she intercepted, she knew it would be unwise to mention Pioneer.control. One other thing, Weld broke through her line of thought. The sword.
Yes.
Dawn replied. You said it was metal. Are you certain?
Yes.
Dawn motioned to the mark on the left side of her neck.
A photon blade would not have been able to make contact.
That is certainly unusual. More typing. So where is it? Dawn's expression did not change.
I don't understand the question.
The sword. He attacked you, stabbed himself, and then it disappeared? Dawn raised her left forearm to gesture to her pod.
Recall.
It was a useful safety feature. If a hunter was ever knocked out or killed, their weapons would return to their cache so that they could not be pilfered. Weld frowned. His pod was destroyed. You destroyed it.
I damaged it.
Dawn corrected her.
Though I do not have proof of it, I can verify that the recall function occurred. If you believe I took it, I consented to being searched. The sword is not in my cache, nor is it on my person. Your men verified this information.
This did not satisfy the investigator, but Dawn knew she was exhausting her line of questioning. Michaela typed a few more things, stood up, and told her she was free to go, thanking her for her patience and her cooperation. Guard headquarters was a short walk from the guild. Commuter ships orbited overhead as Dawn made her way through the large sealed walkway that connected the districts, its transparent walls making it a viewing platform for the planet below. She searched the surface for the storm she had been in just hours prior, marveling at how miniature it appeared from orbit. There were a few other storms just like it, scattered across the planet, and she began to recognize patterns in their formation based on the meteorological data she had unwillingly gathered.
Ambient temperature 009 degrees.
She decided not to look at the storms anymore. She received a message from Ruben. Where are you? It read. In less than an instant, she had replied.
I am nearly back at the guild. The guard needed me to come in again.
It took a bit of time for Ruben to type his response. You gotta tell them to leave you alone. They can't expect you to do everything for them.
That is true. However, I do not mind assisting them when I can.
She still had not told him about everything that happened. As far as he knew, she had been leaving to go on routine expeditions and there was nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't that she wanted to keep him in the dark, she just didn't want him to worry. She resolved to tell him about it tomorrow, on their day off. And that reminded her of another thing she had resolved to do, and so she wrote another message. This one to M.
Hello, Doctor. I wanted to say this to you in person, but I understand you are very busy in the coming weeks. I directly disobeyed your commands, and I wish to apologize.
She was not sure how he was going to react to the message, but sent it anyway. The doctor was unpredictable at times, though mostly to her he was compassionate and understanding. It was the times when he was not that caused her to doubt her evaluation of his response, and when it came through, she felt a familiar twinge of discomfort. My dear, I hope a day comes when you feel no shame in disobeying me. All is well. M. It did not fully allay her concerns and raised a few more questions, but it was better than she anticipated. He was an enigmatic man, and much of what he said made little sense to her, but she reasoned that there must simply be a meaning behind them that she could not yet grasp. She arrived at the guild and walked to the front desk to receive her payment. It was just enough for a drink and a meal for one, so she made a note to treat Ruben to dinner later and made her way over to the vendor outside. The machine had been cleaned, or serviced, or perhaps both, because the fortified tea came out faster than usual, and the 2-inch square sticker on the bottom right of the display was nowhere to be seen. There was not even residue left behind. She wondered if maybe the entire faceplate had been replaced, And then those thoughts of dismantling the machine and peering at its inner workings resurfaced, and she entertained them while she drank, the soft tingling of the beverage gently mixing with her aimless thoughts. When she was done, she placed the empty can back in the vendor's open slot and watched as it was taken in by the machine to be recycled. Then she noticed there were a few other cans lying around, and, on a whim, she picked them all up and watched the process happen for each one. During this, a young woman exiting the guild noticed her, stopping to stare in confusion. Dawn turned to return her gaze. She clearly wasn't a hunter. Her clothes were plain and her pod civilian grade. She compared her face to others in her database and recognized her as one of the guild clerks, not the new girl, one who had been there a while. She smiled as best as she could.
Simon says recycle your cans.
The clerk scoffed. Simon says a lot of things. She walked past her without another word. On the train ride home, Dawn's thoughts returned to the sword. It had bypassed her hard light armor as though it were paper, yet it was halted by her skin. Perhaps, she thought, it was due to its material properties. A highly reflective surface could, perhaps, cut through photons, making hard light useless as a defense. That kind of power in the wrong hands would be, as she had experienced, a disaster. She looked forward to examining it herself. The sword was not a hard light construct, but a pod did not discriminate. And while most of her weapons were held in a licensed cache owned by the guild, she had, since she was first built, access to a private cache, protected by an encryption key that only she and M knew. It was there that the blade waited for her to call on it. Among some other weapons the guard would not be happy to know she possessed. But they didn't have to know everything. Another message. Reuben was asking if she was on her way.
Yes, I was at the vendor and spoke with one of the guild clerks.
A short pause. What'd you get?
Fortified tea.
Gross. She liked that. Thank you for listening to this proof of concept episode of First Light, an original science fiction short story compilation by Scott McGowan. If you are interested in taking part in the production of future episodes, please email me at the email address in the description.